All right, we left off with all of our C's, different things about the life of Abraham, and we're picking that up today with his covenant. Last couple things that we mentioned, his courage in chapter 14, where he goes after those that had captured his nephew, and then his communion as he returns, and he meets with Melchizedek. So we looked at some possibilities for that. I do believe that Melchizedek was an actual king. He was an actual priest. He wasn't just an Old Testament appearance of Christ. There are in the Bible, actually in the book of Genesis, there are a lot of references to what I believe is Jesus Christ coming down and having dealings with man. And so we'll look at that in a little bit. Melchizedek, I don't believe, is ever looked at in the Bible as an actual Old Testament appearance of Christ. I know Hebrews chapter 7 is there, and that is the main passage that's used by those who say that Melchizedek was. But the Bible talks a lot about details, physical details about him. He was a king. He was at Salem. He received tithes. He actually was there. He was a human being. You know, there's a lot of indications, I think, cultural clues, if you're in my Bible geography class, that he was a real person, not just an Old Testament appearance of Christ. Okay? So that's where we finished up the other day. And so we'll move now to his covenant that God makes with Abraham in chapter 15. So you go to Genesis chapter 15. You say, the covenant, I thought we've seen this already before. Yes, we have. But this, I believe, is the final institution of the covenant with Abraham that God makes. Here in chapter 15, we won't spend long on this, but there's a very interesting story here. We'll try to quickly describe to you what happened as they finalize this covenant. Look down at verse number 7 of chapter 15. He said unto him, I am the Lord that brought thee out of Ur of the Chaldees to give thee this land to inherit it. And he said, Lord God, whereby shall I know that I shall inherit it? And he said unto him, take me an heifer of 3 years old, and a she-goat of 3 years old, and a ram of 3 years old, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. He took unto him all these, and divided them in the midst. He just filleted them open. And then he laid each piece one against another, but the birds divided he not. And when the fowls came down upon the carcasses, Abram drove them away. And when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and lo, an horror of great darkness fell upon him, and he goes to sleep. And he said unto Abraham, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And we see some prophecies taking place, going on down to verse 17. And it came to pass that when the sun went down and it was dark, behold, a smoking furnace and a burning lamp that passed between those pieces, the pieces of the dead animals, the sacrificed animals. In the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, unto thy seed have I given this land, and so on. All right, so what happened here? What is this all about? Kind of spooky, is it not? That all of this would happen the way it did. So let's just, I think it's pretty interesting that, as far as the cultural details of what happened here. Let me read to you a little bit what I have found about this. Abraham, or Abram, his name's going to change to Abraham a little bit later on. But Abram gathered the creatures. In our culture today, whenever two parties determine to enter into agreement, they sign a paper. They sign a document. In the old days of America, it was a handshake. That's all that you needed. But this covenant was different. Back then, two parties would slaughter some animals, carve them up, and arrange the pieces in two lines. And then you would both walk between these sacrificed pieces of flesh as in the presence of these dead animals who had to suffer and give their life to verify our treaty, our agreement. In the presence of these animals, we're solidifying this covenant. In the presence of blood and suffering and death, they showed their intention to keep the terms of the contract. So, there's several covenants mentioned in different places in the Old Testament I think are interesting. One here is the covenant of blood. Another is the covenant of the shoe. Right? You talk about weird. That's real weird. I'm not giving any of my shoes away, you know. One of them, because then it does me no good. I'll give you both of them. Because once you give one away, I mean, they're worthless. I know back then they probably had just a whole bunch of right foots and a whole bunch of left foots. They didn't have sizes and all that kind of stuff. But still, the covenant of the shoe. There's also in Numbers 18 a covenant of salt. So, as odd as this seems to us, these are different ways of having a ceremony to verify, to ratify a covenant. God, I believe, in the form of a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch, God passed through these bloody pieces. Now it's interesting that only God passed through them. Abram's laying there sleeping. And God goes through these pieces alone. Usually it'd be both parties going through there. What does that tell you about that promise, this covenant?
Only guys would be able to keep it.
Okay? Anybody want to add to that? There's a specific word that we talk about with these promises of God. There are several different kinds of promises that God makes. One is conditional on us. If my people, which are called by my name, if we do this, then God will do this. But this is an unconditional promise to Abraham. God's walking through there and he says, I'm going to keep my end of the bargain, and that's all that matters. Abraham, you're going to be the father of many nations. And I'm going to give you this land. I don't care what the Palestinians say about it. Okay, I don't care what the Muslims say about it. I don't care. The bottom line is, I know, according to God's promise here, and according to seeing God's promises always fulfilled, that God will keep his promise. This is an unconditional promise when God passed through there alone. So this Abrahamic covenant was announced in Genesis chapter 12. It was confirmed in Genesis chapter 13, again in Genesis chapter 15, and now in Genesis chapter 15 again, it's ratified, legally documented. It's an interesting way to put it. So here in this covenant, I want you to note now 7 things that God promises to Abraham. I shouldn't call him Abraham. He's not technically Abraham yet. He's Abram still. All 7 have come to pass. Let's quickly just touch on these. First, he said that Abram's descendants would be strangers in a foreign land. That's the first prophecy here that goes along with this very odd to us, this covenant that's ratified. Abram's descendants would be strangers in a foreign land. Genesis chapter 46, it's fulfilled. Also that they would be servants in that land. Know for sure that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them. There'll be servants and slaves in that land. Exodus chapter 1, we see that fulfilled. We see also, he says, and they shall afflict them 400 years. Exodus chapter 12, verse 40 tells us that. They were in there for 430 years. And of course, they were afflicted for 400 of that, or so. Next, it's also prophesied that God himself would judge that nation. Verse 14. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge. Oh yes. God literally destroyed Egypt. The powerhouse of the world, God brought them to their knees in about a year. He could have done it all at once. He could have sent a huge, dust storm or whatever. But he pulled it out over a year. 10 great plagues that came upon that nation which enslaved Israel. We see also then he says that Abram would be spared these things. And thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace. Thou shalt be buried in a good old age. You're not going to see this, Abram. You're going to be long gone. Excuse me. Next, he says that after spending 4 generations in Egypt, Israel would return in the 4th generation. Note verse 16. But in the 4th generation they shall come hither again. For the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. So they're going to return in the 4th generation. So we see that generation being fulfilled, or this promise, in Exodus chapter 6, verse 16 through 20. We see a listing of these generations. By the way, a modern generation for us is not the same as it was back then, because people lived longer. So what do they typically say, 30 years or 40 years or something like that? In our day is a generation. In those days, they lived to be over 100, well over 100, and so generations are much larger. But, excuse me, the first generation, Exodus chapter 6, is Levi, and then his son Kohath, and then Amram, and then the 4th generation they'd return. The son of Amram is Moses. So this is a listing of the 4 generations that's in Exodus chapter 6. And then the final promise that Israel would come out of Egypt with great substance. Verse number 14. They shall come out with great substance. And we see that being fulfilled, of course, in Exodus chapter 12, when the Egyptians are literally giving them anything they can find to give them, to send them away. They're paying them to leave. All right, we find a very, very interesting sub-point or side point about this. Verse 16, in the 4th generation they shall come hither again. They're going to come back into the land of Canaan. Why for 4 generations are they gone? For the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. The Amorites, who are those? Those are those people living in the land of Canaan. The Bible has numerous occasions in this story of Abraham already referred to the Canaanites as Amorites. And so here it is again. The Amorites, they're so full of sin and iniquity that God said he's going to destroy them. And But God is merciful, and his patience is long-suffering, and so on. Okay, so that's chapter 15. We've only gone through 4 chapters of the life of Abraham. Things will speed up here in just a bit. Next, I want you to notice Abram's compromise. Chapter 16. Abram's compromise. Abram is now 86 years old. By the way, his name doesn't get changed to Abraham until he's 99. Okay? 99 years old. Sorry, that was me. So, at this point, he's still Abram. That's really, really funny to think about. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. But his son's name is Isaac for a good reason. Everybody laughed at poor old Abraham and Sarah. But anyway, so here in chapter 16 still, he's compromised. How does he compromise? He listens to his wife, who suggests that this common custom of accepting a mistress as your wife and having a child by her, and then Sarah would raise that child as her own. And so maybe that's what God meant in his promise. So Sarai persuades Abram to father a child through the Egyptian handmaid Hagar, the Bible tells us. Hagar is expecting a baby, and her arrogant attitude over her owner, her master, Sarai, she says, well, I'm having a baby and you're not. Ooh, that didn't go over well. So Sarai dismisses her out of the household. And here for the first time, I want you to see in chapter 16, I want you to see verse 7. There it is. The first time this phrase is used in the Old Testament. And the angel of the Lord found her. The angel of the Lord. This phrase is, I believe, a reference to the Old Testament appearances of Jesus Christ coming down upon the earth and interacting with man. You have thousands of years now have gone by, 2,000 plus years, and God hasn't worked a lot directly. I mean, there's been very few times, but now we're going to see over and over, the angel of the Lord did this, the angel of the Lord did that with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and so on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Let me just mention, I won't give you all these, but the angel of the Lord throughout the Old Testament ministers to people, different people, as an angel, coming down as some heavenly creature. Can you think of some times, real quickly, different people who had interactions with the angel of the Lord? Trevor? Joshua. Angel of the Lord came down there at Jericho. Lot, yes. Angel of the Lord brought him out. Abraham had several times. Anybody else? Samson. His parents. Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson. Anything else? There's several others. Gideon, I believe. Am I remembering that correctly? I believe so. How about, yes? Did the angel actually appear there? I don't think so. Yes? Huh? Jacob wrestling with the angel. That's a very good one to remember. Should remember that one. Anybody else? I think probably in the fiery furnace. Angel, the form of the fourth is like the Son of God. So these are all different times. Let me see if I missed any here. The angel of the Lord prepared Israel for the promised land. We see mention of that. Angel of the Lord protected Israel at the Red Sea. The angel of the Lord spoke to Moses from the burning bush. The angel of the Lord ministered to Elijah when he was sitting under the, what kind of a tree was it? Was it the juniper tree? Angel of the Lord ministered to him. And the angel of the Lord here ministers to Hagar. Hagar. Think about that. Hagar, yes, she wasn't perfect. Yes, she made fun of her owner. And was an arrogant antagonist to her. But she's a godly woman. Every time you see Hagar, she's praying for help. She's seeing her need. She's a good woman. And Ishmael himself wasn't a bad person either, at least at a young age and growing into a young man he wasn't. Okay, so here's some mentions of the angel of the Lord. I think it's very interesting. Ishmael, of course, the product of this relationship. Abram is 86 years old. Verse 16 tells us he is 86 years old, and Hagar bare Ishmael to Abram. All right, does Abram get away with this? This is a low point, by the way. This is a low point in Abram's life. This is, I think, probably the lowest time in his life. Not only is God seemed to ignore him, well, he goes from 86 years old to 99 years old, the next verse. And there's no mention at all of him meeting with God, talking to the Lord at all. Not only is God not happy with Abram, his wife is not happy with him. Hagar's not happy. I mean, there's nothing going right here. And so he made a bad decision. Now he's paying the price for it. He definitely did not get away with this. And so God comes back to him in chapter 17 again now and starts over with Abraham. All right, in chapter 17, I'm going to continue just with this thought here still. Our last point. We see Abram now, he's 99 years old, and the Lord again, fifth time, talks about this covenant with Abram. I'm going to reaffirm my covenant. I know you were wrong. I know you messed up. I know this and I know that, but I also know that I made a covenant with you that's unconditional. And now you're going to have your own son at 99 years old. I'm going to change your name and your wife's name. Can you imagine Abraham or Abram coming out to his servants and his household? I love to think about this. He says, my name is Abram, father of many. I know I don't have any children, but I'm Abram, the father of many. I'm 99 years old. But I'm changing my name. And everybody says, wow, it's about time. You need to change your name to meaning father of none. Something. You got to change your name. He said, I'm changing my name. And they all said, wow, good. I'm changing it to Abraham, father of multitudes. And everybody says, are you nuts? Father, wow, he's really lost his, he's off his rocker. 99 years old, and he's changing his name to father of multitudes. And then God also in this same period, same time here says, does he give him his son's name already at this point? Yes, on down, I can't see it here. Anyway, maybe he doesn't give him his name, but still, yes, it does. Isaac, it's already before he was born, he was told to him, thou shalt call his name Isaac. Verse number 19, laughter. Some have said that Isaac was named laughter because Sarah laughed in the tent. And I don't think that's the reason why. I think it's because everybody laughed at Abraham and Sarah. Here's Abraham, old goat with his cane in one hand and a kid's hand in the other. And he's walking around and everybody says, oh, wow, Abraham, you're really on it. You had someone, did you have a son? Is that somebody's grandson? Oh no, this is my own son. And here's his wife, Sarah, just old as can be. Probably still pretty though. The Bible talks about how beautiful she was when she was 65 years old. But anyway, so here's Sarah. She was a grandma. Oh no, she wasn't. It's my little baby. Everybody would have laughed and said, wow, this guy is really unbelievable. Abraham and Sarah. Well, Sarah's name is also changed. Sarai's name means contention. She has her name changed to princess. By the way, she doesn't act the part, I don't think. Soon after this, when she, not soon after, but a number of years after this, she throws out Hagar. Not very much of a princess. But anyway, so we see here in this rest of this chapter some of the details about Ishmael and Isaac and Abraham and Sarah. Not only their name changed, name meanings, but also ages and so on like that are interesting. Okay, next I want you to see Abraham's compassion, or the compassion that Abraham has on Lot. That's chapter 18, and then we'll see chapter 19. His compassion. Abraham now, finally I can say that name and be correct about it. Abraham now is visited by the Lord and two angels, and God says that Abraham is going to have this son 1 year from now. And so Abraham, of course, meets the Lord out there. Is this where... Oh, no. Abraham had already received this promise before this in chapter 17 that he was going to have a son. They're going to name him Isaac and all the details. But God hadn't told Sarah yet. And so now he comes down and he meets with Abraham and Sarah. Verse 11 says, they were old and well stricken in age. Well, they are very old. And when they're told about it, verse 12, Sarah laughed within herself, saying, after I am waxed old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord, being old also? And the Lord said to Abraham, wherefore did Sarah laugh? Saying, sure of a surety shall I bear a child which am old? And Sarah denied, saying, I laugh not, for she was afraid. It sounded like my little kindergartner. Oh no, I didn't laugh. And she had just gotten done laughing. And he said, nay, but thou didst laugh. And that's final. I always get a kick out of that. It never says that she said anything after that. He said, you laughed. That's it. She said, oh yeah, I did laugh. You're right. Busted. And the men rose up from thence and looked towards Sodom. Now, where's Abraham living at here? The plains of Mamre. He's down close to Hebron, outside the city of Hebron. Abraham lived there at Hebron for many, many years. So did Isaac, so did Jacob. The city of Hebron is where all three of these patriarchs and their wives were buried. So Hebron is definitely the hub of these patriarchs' lives. They lived around this area all of their life. All gone to different times, but they always came back to Hebron, the plains of Mamre. Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah, not his favorite wife, but Leah, are buried at Hebron. And Hebron is in the south. And so if you're thinking about this, Abraham looks out towards Sodom. He looks out towards the east. And straight east from there is the Dead Sea, and where Sodom and Gomorrah would have been. And I've heard different explanations for this. Some have said that this is close to Bethel somewhere. I don't buy that. He was down at Hebron. They want to argue that Sodom and Gomorrah were at the north end of the Dead Sea, and I don't see that at all. I mean, he's at the plains of Mamre, close to Hebron. He looks off to the east, probably about 15 miles away. They're on a plateau. They're looking down, looking generally out towards when the smoke came out of Sodom and Gomorrah, out of that pit that's called the Dead Sea, they would have, no question, have been able to see that from a good distance away. All right, so what do we see about Abraham's compassion? Abraham, as he's visited by the Lord, God says that he's going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And so Abraham takes it upon himself to confront God, to ask God repeatedly for the life of Lot and his family. Lot is in the city of Sodom. Abraham somehow knows that. I don't know how Abraham knew. Maybe they got an email or something. I'm kidding. But somehow he knew that Lot was in the city. I think Abraham might have just figured out, that Lot, he didn't just move towards the plains of Sodom. He wanted that. That's what he was looking for. And so, of course, when the angel of the Lord goes down to Sodom, there's Lot in the gates of the city as one of the elders of the city. But so Abraham repeatedly asks God for the life of Lot. He goes from requesting 50 to 45 to 40 to 30 to 20 to 10. I don't know why he didn't start lower. You know how it is when you're asking too much, or you think you're asking too much. But he starts at a high number, and he maybe just starts thinking about it. Okay, Lot has at least 4 daughters. We know that. Probably had other children also, by the way. But he had at least 4 daughters. We know that 2 of them came out with him. We know that 2 more stayed in the city and were married to, obviously, more normal Sodomites. People who lived in Sodom. Whew. But they were destroyed. They were burned up. But I can just imagine that Abraham thought, here's 4 daughters at least, who probably are all married. And all 4 of them, or that would make 8, and surely Lot has won them or talked to them about God, and they believe in God. So that would make 10 right there, assuming that Lot has at least gotten his in-laws saved. Of course, it looks that only Lot and his 2 unmarried daughters, of course, and his wife were brought out. His wife even died in the process. Whew, what a mess. What a mess. Let's go now to chapter 19, his corrupted kin. His corrupted kin. What's our time look like here? Here we go. Chapter 19, his corrupted kin. This story is disgusting. It tells the story of just an unbelievably wicked city. I can't even imagine. I've been some places that were you could just feel the wickedness and the corruption. I've been, I don't know, at times in Gary, Indiana, I've felt that. One time I was in college and we were on the ensemble. We were out in Boston, Massachusetts. And 11 o'clock at night, on a Saturday night, there was a guy who had a little church in town, kind of a mission, really. And he would go to Harvard Square and street preach at 11 o'clock p.m. on Saturday night. He did this for 25 years. And it's the most wicked place I've ever been. I mean, it felt like Sodom and Gomorrah. And he had these, the square is huge and it's filled, absolutely stuffed, filled with people and tourists and all of these, fired baton jugglers and all these people doing shows and, wrapped up in a Houdini suit and dragged up in the air, and they have to get out of the straitjacket, all that kind of, all this stuff is going on. And he'd get out there and he would preach. And he had these hecklers that would surround him. Get right up in his face, yelling and screaming at him as loud as they could. And they were all homosexuals and dressed in dresses. They would come out there purposely to try to get him and to put on, really, they actually, it's the weirdest thing, but they would actually protect him. And if the tourists got too involved and when we were there, somebody took his hat. He always wore this red hat. Said, "Make America Great Again." No, I didn't. He wore a red hat that said something about Jesus or whatever. Jesus saves, that's what he said. Some tourist grabbed his hat and ran off with it. And these hecklers chased the guy down and got his hat back for him. And so on. So we're all out there passing out tracts. I've never felt and seen that kind of just absolute filth. Makeup, they were all dressed up to the hilt, and filthy, filthy talking. Yeah. Oh, my goodness. Anyway, Sodom and Gomorrah. Anyway, that's what Sodom must have felt like. Just every night. Think about this. This is just one example. Here comes the angel of the Lord, the personal appearance of Jesus Christ on earth, the earth that he created. He walks into this city, and I can just imagine that any time a stranger, a visitor came into town unsuspecting, this kind of stuff happened. But usually they weren't protected by Lot. They were completely molested and so on. A despicable city. And here comes the angel of the Lord to walk into this. The other example that we've already talked about is when God came down to Babel and said, "I'm going to see what they're doing." It's not because he can't see it, because God wanted to show us. He wanted to write down how bad it was. He wanted us to know that. And by the way, there's been other cities like this in the Bible. There were literally Tyre and Sidon. God said, if I don't punish Tyre and Sidon for their wickedness, I have to pull up Sodom and Gomorrah out of the ash heap and apologize to them. Okay, so there were other wicked cities in the Bible as well. And of course, one was a Benjamite city, right? Gibeah, in the book of Judges. Exact same story. So anyway, so his corrupted kin, I don't really want to spend a long time here, but Lot is a ruler in the city of Sodom. Well, you talk about fitting in. And the Bible later on talks about him having his righteous soul vexed with the filthy conversation of the wicked. I understand that. Lot was a saved man, no question about it. He was a saved man, but he lived a miserable, despicable life, especially once he moved away from Abraham. And we could talk about Lot, what's he doing when he looked longingly at Sodom. He chose the area of land near Sodom. He pitched his tent towards Sodom, Genesis 13:12, and then he moved into the city of Sodom in Genesis 14. And finally, he gives both his daughters and his energies to Sodom. Started small and ended up ruining his life. All right, that's all I'm going to deal with as far as the story of Lot. Let's go down to chapter 20 now. By the way, God destroyed the city of Sodom. There's a lot of interesting things about that. Probably, I believe, an earthquake or some kind of... The whole area is very volatile. If you read about Yellowstone National Park and how it's sitting on top of a mega volcano, they believe. It's that type of area in the Dead Sea area. It's right on a fault line, and so there have been many earthquakes and things. It also, the Bible in Genesis 14 talks about slime pits and so on. There's a lot of things like that, chemicals in that area that very likely, I think, exploded and just rained fire and brimstone right down upon the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah and burnt them up. In chapter 20, I want you to see again Abraham's carnality. He kind of goes backward again. He moves away to a Philistine area near Gerar to sojourn, to practice his nomadic lifestyle. Anyway, he comes down to Gerar, and he fears for his wife again. Yet indeed she is my sister. Oh yes, there we go again. Some people believe that this was earlier in the story, that it actually fits in earlier. I don't believe so. But if it's true here that this happened in sequence, his wife is fair to look upon. Yep. She's 90 plus years old. And Abraham's afraid that she'll get taken away. Interesting. All right, so he goes backward here and, of course, brings embarrassment to his family and embarrassment to his wife and so on. And no wonder she doesn't act like a princess. She doesn't have much respect for him. All right, chapter 21, his celebration. Finally, wow, finally he has a son. Not quite a nation yet, not quite a multitude yet, father of multitudes, but he has a son. And that son, of course, is named Laughter, Isaac. All right, Isaac is born. A great celebration is held to mark the weaning. And after a while, Hagar and her 14-year-old son Ishmael. Say, well, how do we know he was 14? Because Ishmael was born when Abraham was 86, and Isaac is born when Abraham is 100. So 14 years old. Here's a 14-year-old teenage boy, Ishmael, making fun of the little baby Isaac, probably doing what everybody else was doing. Laughing. This is funny, that this old couple would have a baby. But Sarah has it out for Hagar. Sarah has it out for Ishmael. And so I believe she notices this one laughing and says, oh no, I'm not putting up with this. And so Hagar and her 14-year-old son are sent away for mocking Isaac during this weaning time. A party, a celebration. Okay, and what does God do? God ministers to Hagar and Ishmael again by pointing her to a fresh well. And the Bible says that Ishmael leaves there and doesn't give us much of his life story as far as what happened to him here in the meantime. But when he became an adult, he married an Egyptian girl. He married an Egyptian girl and became an expert archer. That's what the Bible tells us he did. All right, we're getting close, guys. All right, chapter 22, his Calvary. This is the iconic story, right? One of the great stories in the Bible. Abraham is commanded to offer his son Isaac. I'm sure you've read through this as I have. I think it's amazing how God commands Abraham to do this and just sticks the knife in and just twists it back and forth. He said, look at verse number 2. Take now thy son, thine only son, Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah. There's no objection here at all from Abraham. The Bible says he rose up early in the morning Now, before you try something like this, you got to know God told you to do this. Okay? Now, God doesn't ask us to kill our children, but He does ask us to give something extra. He does ask us to give our best sometimes. Sometimes God may say, hey, I want you to give all of your savings. Something like that. Well, you better know that's God telling you to do that. And Abraham knew that. I believe God spoke to him audibly. God told him to do this. Abraham knew the voice of God. He had heard the voice of God many times before this. He knew it was God. It was not, I think maybe it possibly could be, and then as soon as it's something hard, well, that surely wasn't God. He knew it was God. So if God asks you to do something, make sure it's Him, and then do it. Do it. I've heard of 45, 50-year-old people becoming missionaries. Right? I'm sure you've all heard stories like that. You better know that's God, and then do it. And I love to hear, to see that. Those are the kind of people, because they're in tune with God, they are very successful. They see great results because God clearly led them, and so on. But anyway, not that that's on the same level as this. I mean, this is off the charts. Here's God's asking you to sacrifice literally the son that you waited all those years to receive, and Abraham just gets up, heads out. It's a 3-day journey. How many questions are going through his mind? Hebrews chapter 11 tells us that Abraham sacrificed. Abraham gave his son. He gave his son. I know he didn't kill him, but he same as killed him. He gave his son for a sacrifice. That son, Isaac, was as good as dead. The Bible tells us in Hebrews chapter 11. He was dead. He's a dead man. In Abraham's mind, this isn't even a question. I'm going to follow through all the way to the end. There's no question about this. But Abraham also, because of this, is recognized for his great faith, because he knew that if God let him kill his son, God had promised him that he would have his son Isaac, that this would be the father of many nations and so on. He said God has to raise him from the dead. The Bible says in Hebrews chapter 11 that Abraham believed in the resurrection. The resurrection. He knew God would raise his son from the dead if he had to. And sure enough, God stopped him, of course, right before he got there. Look at verse 4. This is very interesting. Then on the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. He looked across the hills and he saw Mount Moriah. Mount Moriah is not like a mountain way out in the distance that you can see, with the snow caps and all. It's nothing like that. Mount Moriah is in Jerusalem. There's hardly ever snow in Jerusalem. This spot, I've been to this location where they believe is the last hill that you come over the top of where you can finally actually see Mount Moriah. You can see the Temple Mount coming from the south. And of course, he's at Hebron. He's coming from the south, and he comes over the hill and he sees Mount Moriah. On that site now is a building that was supposed to have been built, to house the UN originally, 1948 or 49 or something. Maybe it was in the 50s, I forget. But it was supposed to house the UN in Jerusalem. And of course, that didn't happen. The building sits there empty. But anyway, so we came to this site, and I've got some great pictures. And it's a long ways off still. It's 1.5 miles, 2 miles. Easy, across the huge valley in the Kidron Valley on the right. Gives you a great view of what Abraham, he didn't see, now it's all city, but of what he would have seen as he's looking off to that mountain of Mount Moriah. Of course, the Bible is very clear that this is the site where the temple would be built. I got ahead of myself, actually, where David would buy a threshing floor. And then that land property would be used to build the temple by David's son, Solomon. All right. So, behold the fire and the wood. Where's the lamb? Isaac says, yep. God will provide himself a lamb. Okay, great story. I wish we could take a whole class period just on chapter 22. All right, let's finish this up real quickly. Genesis chapter 23 then, the cave. Abraham buys a cave. What for? What does he want a cave for? To bury his wife. This is at Hebron. This is the same cave. Now there's a big mosque built over this, where they believe the site to be of the burial place of Abraham and his wife, Isaac and his wife, and Jacob and one of his wives. So this is the cave of Machpelah. He buys it from a Hittite. Sons of Heth. And the process of buying this property is really neat, a cultural thing. He offers them money for it, and the people of Heth say, no, we can't sell it, but we'll give it to you. And Abraham says, well, how much would you give it to me for? Yes, this price. Oh, that's not price, this gift. Oh, that's very nice of you to give me this cave for a gift. And so he buys it with that in mind, to bury his wife. All right, chapter 24. His command to get a wife for Isaac. His command. We see chapter 24. Abraham getting a wife for his son Isaac. And of course Eleazar does this. His trusted servant. It's a great story here of the servant going out to find a bride for his master's son. Very similar, a lot of similarities. I'm going to stop right there, and we'll pick up with this story under the life of Isaac as he receives a wife.